Welcome to the debate. Cities globally are wrestling with an escalating, just a suffocating crisis of congestion and emissions, pushing planners towards some radically new solutions. The material we're looking at today frames the resurgence of the microcar, compact electric vehicles like the Microlino, as potentially ushering in a new era of urban mobility.
And that very premise, that this is a new era, is exactly what we need to scrutinize. I mean, we have to ask, is this a genuine revolution, or is it just a very specialized response to a narrow set of problems?
Absolutely. So the core question we're tackling is whether this new generation of electric microcars has what it takes to be a systemic primary solution for urban transport, to actually replace the conventional car. Or, as you're suggesting, if their inherent limitations really just confine them to a very specific niche. I'm going to argue that these microcars are a foundational solution, that they can fundamentally transform city travel through efficiency, sustainability, and some really practical design.
And I'll be coming at it from a different angle. Look, I acknowledge the appeal, the reduced footprint, but I believe they're fundamentally limited by their classification, by their performance. And these limitations, I think, relegate them to being a luxury second car or a neighborhood runabout, which stops them from being a credible, universal fix for our big urban transport issues.
Okay, so let me start by articulating why the microcar really does represent a systemic solution, something capable of a real paradigm shift. These vehicles, they offer benefits that directly address the most painful problems of city life, congestion and the constant headache of parking. They are, as the source material puts it, uniquely positioned to tackle the challenges of urban life. We need to start with what I'd call the spatial revolution they enable.
The spatial revolution?
Yes. I mean, just consider the parking issue. The small size of something like the Microlino allows for what's called transverse parking. So you pull in perpendicular to the curb. This means these vehicles need only about a third of the space of a normal car. Just, picture it. 3 microcars fit into a single parking spot. This completely changes street capacity, and it cuts down on that time we all spend just circling the block, which is a huge part of city traffic.
That is an undeniable benefit in terms of footprint, I'll grant you that. But let's be careful not to conflate a smaller footprint with systemic functionality.
Well, wait, let me just finish establishing the case here. Because beyond parking, the electric powertrain gives you a significantly reduced environmental footprint. We're talking up to 60% lower cradle-to-grave emissions than even a conventional larger EV. This isn't just a small improvement, it's a huge leap. And what's more, the innovation and utility makes ownership so much more practical for city dwellers. You have models like the Silence SO4 with the swappable battery system that you can literally wheel into your apartment to charge. And the Microlino can charge like a smartphone from any household socket. This independence from public charging infrastructure, it validates the call from people like Marlon Ubuter for a true paradigm shift. Especially when you see models like the Eli Zero priced at $11,900?
I see why you're emphasizing the practical side and the efficiency. But let me give you a different perspective, one that's rooted not in convenience, but in mandatory safety and functional compromises. If we're talking about a systemic, primary solution, a vehicle to replace the family car, we just cannot overlook the compromises made in its very design and classification. While I agree the size reduction is great, the material itself classifies these vehicles as L7E and L6E quadricycles, which are just the European classifications for light and heavy quadricycles. Yes, exactly. And that classification explicitly means they are not subject to the same strict, rigorous crash safety regulations as traditional cars. So the inherent safety is compromised to achieve that small size. When the material points out that the Microlino's unique front opening door, while clever for parking, is a hazard in the event of a frontal collision and a point of weakness, we have to stop and think, if the solution requires sacrificing fundamental crash safety, how can it be a primary replacement for the masses?
But that's a regulatory definition designed for high-speed highways, not a functional failure for city use.
I think it is a functional failure if it wants to be a systemic replacement. And what's more, the performance limits that come from this classification restrict their use exclusively to urban centers. The Eli Zero, for example, is legally a neighborhood electric vehicle, an NEV, with a top speed of just 25 miles per hour. That confines it strictly to local roads. Its purpose is, by definition, specialized.
You're really focusing on the most restricted models there.
But I have to address the language being used here. Even the maker of the Microlino seems to admit its real market position, marketing it as the perfect second car and a supplement to an SUV. I mean, that's not the language of a systemic solution. It's the language of a niche product meant to supplement, not supplant. And this brings us right to our first major disagreement. This inescapable trade-off between size and efficiency on one hand and safety and regulation on the other.
I think that trade-off is framed unfairly. You're arguing for systemic adoption of something that, yes, avoids certain safety standards by definition, but the real question is, are those standards even relevant to urban transportation?
How can a vehicle with an identified frontal collision hazard be considered a mass-market alternative? I mean, a core requirement of any replacement for the family car has to be comparable safety, especially given that flaw with the front opening door in a very common city scenario, a low-speed frontal impact. If it's structurally compromised at city speeds, it's not a solution. It's a liability we're asking commuters to accept.
I'm just not convinced by that because you're applying highway safety standards for 70-mile-per-hour crashes, to urban mobility problems. The vast majority of city trips are at low speeds. These microcars are built with a context-specific safety profile. The modern designs have significant structural innovation. The Microlino, for instance, uses the first unibody safety cell made of steel and aluminum in its category. That structure provides more than adequate protection for the environment it's designed for, the congested, low-speed city, where top speeds are often, 45 kilometers per hour for the Microlino Light?
Adequate protection is not the same as comparable protection. The classification exists so manufacturers can bypass expensive crash testing. If this were truly a systemic solution, they should be aiming for and achieving those higher safety standards to build public trust. By just saying, oh, it's only used at low speeds, you're inherently restricting the vehicle's utility and forcing the user into a state of, constant risk avoidance. That's not sustainable.
But the risks are different. The focus has to be on solving the mobility crisis where it's actually happening. That means prioritizing maneuverability and efficiency over crash testing for speeds the vehicle will almost never encounter in its intended habitat. The trade-off is deliberate. We accept a slightly higher localized risk in exchange for drastically improving city life by cutting congestion and pollution. We are redefining what safe mobility even means in a dense urban core.
That assumes his urban core exists in a bubble. But modern city life is all interconnected. For any primary vehicle, you need access to the whole metropolitan area. Ring roads, higher speed bypasses, suburban arteries. If a vehicle can't safely and legally access all parts of that infrastructure, it is, by definition, limited. If it's just a neighborhood shuttle, it fails the test of being a systemic replacement.
And that question of access brings us right to our second point. Performance and range versus what people actually need for mobility. You bring up the limitations, but let's look at the modern specs, which I think make your utility argument, mostly moot for most city drivers.
I disagree. Range is one thing. Velocity is another.
Okay, let's start with range. Modern microcars offer ranges that are more than viable for any urban trip you can think of. The Microlino, with its biggest battery, gets up to 228 kilometers. The Silence SO4 gets 92 miles, 148 kilometers, plus the utility of swappable batteries. These numbers far exceed what a typical daily urban commute requires. For city dwellers, this makes them perfectly capable primary vehicles.
That's a compelling point on range, I'll give you that, but what about the velocity restrictions that basically negate that utility? The range is useless if the top speed is legally restrictive. We talked about the Eli Zero, an NEV, legally capped at 25 miles per hour. It can't go on most major roads, even within the city.
That's a very specific vehicle for, gated communities or large campuses. It's a segment.
But even the top-tier Microlino, the L7E model, it tops out at 90 kilometers per hour, about 55 miles per hour. That's fine for city streets, but it's often not enough for faster urban arteries, ring roads, or the connecting highways people use to cross a large city. Can you imagine trying to merge onto a major bypass doing 55 when traffic is flowing at 65 or 70? It's stressful. It's dangerous. By classifying themselves in a way that restricts speed, they give up their claim to comprehensive mobility.
But I'd argue that the idea that every urban vehicle must perform at 70 miles per hour is exactly what got us into this mess of congestion. The microcar forces us to think locally. They're shifting the paradigm. And the Microlino Light, which you can operate with a moped license, only goes 45 kilometers per hour. That lowers the barrier to entry. It maximizes accessibility for, say, teenagers or elderly residents who just need guaranteed local mobility. It's a deliberate segmentation to maximize utility.
But that segmentation confirms it's a niche role. If a huge number of people, commuters, parents who need to cross town, can't rely on it, then it's not a systemic solution. It's a supplemental device. And about that swappable battery, that utility only works if the infrastructure is everywhere. If it's not, you're still tethered to your neighborhood.
Infrastructure follows adoption. But we should also talk about the cost of entry, which ties right into accessibility.
That's the critical point. We agree they're efficient in theory, but are they genuinely accessible enough to drive systemic change?
They are. If you look at the total equation, let's look at the initial
Price. The Microlino starts at, what, 21,990 euros? That's a significant price for a two-seater quadricycle. Now contrast that with other small EVs mentioned in the material, like the VinFast VF3, which sold over 28,000 units in 8 months. Consumers are clearly drawn to a blend of affordability and universal utility, which the microcar at its premium price often doesn't deliver.
I'm sorry, I just don't buy that the sticker price alone defines its role. That's a very traditional way of looking at it. We have to look beyond that to the total cost of ownership, the TCO, which is what's critical for changing consumer behavior long term.
But for systemic change, people have to be able to afford the entry ticket. Does that high price restrict microcars to just affluent consumers looking for a novelty or a third car?
No, because the savings redefine the value proposition. Let's break down the TCO. The material shows that owners can save more than 2,500 Swiss francs a year. Why? No fuel costs, dramatically lower insurance because of the lower top speed, and minimal maintenance. And crucially, the city parking savings are immense. In some cities, microcars are exempt from paid parking entirely. That's a huge urban expense just gone.
Those savings are compelling over 5 years, sure, but what about the immediate barrier? A family deciding between a small, used EV that can handle the highway and a new Microlino for almost 22,000 euros is probably going to choose the former based on utility and safety, regardless of future savings.
And so the industry adapts the excess model, which is exactly what's happening. They're already addressing that cost barrier with innovative models. You see leasing options for the Microlino in Switzerland, membership programs for the Biro in Italy. This allows users to access the vehicle without the high upfront cost. This flexibility and long-term economy is what makes them a feasible alternative. That high sticker price reflects the new, rigorous construction, that steel and aluminum safety cell, which provides the durability needed for sustained urban use.
And I maintain that membership programs just confirm that the product is best for temporary or supplemental use, not as a permanent foundation for transit. They are exceptional, specialized solutions, but they fail the test of universal applicability because of their inherent speed and safety limitations. No amount of TCO savings can overcome that if the vehicle can't meet basic metropolitan mobility demands.
I maintain that microcars successfully use electric technology and ingenious design to fix the core failures of traditional city transport: parking, pollution, congestion. They represent a deliberate, necessary rejection of oversized cars in dense areas. Their features aren't limitations. They're conscious design choices that maximize urban utility, making them foundational to a less congested urban future. We have to redefine the vehicle for the environment it operates in.
And I conclude that while microcars offer compelling features for short, specific trips, their necessary categorization as quadricycles places structural limits on their safety and utility. The compromises in their design, the safety concerns, the speed limitations, the premium cost, mean they fall short of being a credible, comprehensive replacement for conventional vehicles for most urban users. They remain excellent additions, but poor foundations.
It's clear that the material presents a powerful tension between the ideal of ultra-compact, sustainable transport and the practical realities of traditional safety regulations and the performance that modern interconnected cities seem to require.
Exactly.
The success of this whole movement really rests on whether consumers and urban planners will prioritize efficiency and environmental impact over the traditional expectations of high-speed performance and structural safety. There's certainly a lot more to explore in how cities will navigate that trade-off.
We thank you for joining us on The Debate.